I went to the March for Our Lives yesterday at Union Park, and I was pretty cynical about going, just to be totally honest. Why, the question? Great question, dare you ask. So, well, I wasn't going to talk about this, but apparently I am. Real briefly, the cover of Time magazine that people are so enthusiastic about was super problematic in my world. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you know, the five students from Parkland were featured on the cover of Time magazine with a big statement that says enough. And the challenge is that they were all very fair-skinned folks. And the fact that it takes that for a movement to erupt the way that it has is very problematic. And I didn't want to go to the march and leave more cynical than I was already feeling. But I have a very precocious 9-year-old who was like, oh no, we're going to the march. And I was like, okay. And I wanted to encourage her practice of civil disobedience because I'm a huge fan. And so she said, we're going. And I will tell you, the march organizers across the country, I give big, big props. They did a fantastic job. Every march that I have watched clips of thus far in DC, and specifically the one I attended in Chicago, was really led by young people of color. And there was a huge presence from young women of color. And if you would hear the voices of young women assert what they are calling for as the future, you can't help but be inspired. You could go into that space as cynical as you want, and they will move you. There was a woman, man, I think she said she was in 7th grade yesterday. And she said something like, look, I don't have a fancy job title. I don't have a big check. I don't have a beach house to lose. So I'm going to use my voice. And I was like, wow, she doesn't have a beach house to lose. That is a very good point. She doesn't have anything to lose. So she's just going to talk. Thank God for that. I think it's an invitation, actually, certainly an invitation for me to say, what am I afraid of losing? What am I afraid of losing such that I don't speak? You know, I was in a couples group yesterday, and we're doing an exercise of revealing, to live on the edge, the thing that we don't want to say. And I said the piece about, you know, it was a group that I made the assumption would be super enthusiastic about the cover of Time magazine. And I just said, look, what's true, if you were to really know me, that was the sentence stem, if you were to really know me, you'd know that the cover of Time magazine is super problematic and bothers me, and here's why. And it was like, I'm just going to keep practicing my own muscle of saying whatever I have to say and not manage the results of what I may or may not lose. Do you understand what I'm saying? You know, as we become adults, we start to get our creature comforts. And we start to prop ourselves up in ways that we become terrified of losing those things. And so then our life becomes not necessarily about our values, but about maintaining a lifestyle. And I can assure you, we are not on the planet to maintain a lifestyle. Your life will be maintained. That's automatic. You actually don't have to do anything to maintain your life. Your life will maintain. So I honor you guys for the work that you're doing. I honor you for your willingness to be bold and to say the thing that folks may not want to hear, but needs to be said, because that is the very essence of this theme. Consciousness creates. And when you say the thing, when you step forward in spaces and say what's true for you, despite the collective agreement, a new consciousness is born. So, let us not ever be a people that start to thwart the expression of ideas because it's uncomfortable. The great practice that we could take on as human beings is to expand our capacity for curiosity around that which is being presented before us. So, just to take a quick detour, I want to celebrate any Loyola Ramblers in the room. Stephen, you've been on my heart and mind all week, beloved. What's amazing about this team is, in 1963, the Loyola Ramblers won the national championship. And at the time that they did that, they also disrupted the entire paradigm of integration in basketball. They were the first team to have a starting lineup with 4 black men. And they were violating the unspoken agreement at the time that you could have no more than 2 black men start. Now, they haven't really done much since then. In all fairness to the Loyola Ramblers. So, the thing I'm interested in exploring today is celebrating the tension of change. Because this guy came on to coach the team in 2011. And it's 2018. And my guess is, because I understand the human mind, I understand human behavior, is he's been spending the last 7 years celebrating the tension of change. It took a lot of time to get to now. They have this sister that is their prayer chaplain that is 98 and has been doing this since 1994. She has been praying for this tired team since 1994. And it took until 2018, and she was 98, to see a change. That is a great metaphor. I noticed, I said to Rainbow, I have this experience of Bodhi Spiritual Center where there are days where I'm like, we're doing it. We're taking over the world. To, you know what, just forget it all. I have like an on or off switch about the place. And I said to Rainbow when she and I were together, we were working on something this past week, and I said, there's this part in this movie that she and I are both familiar with where there's like a plant that's about to bust through the soil. It's about to bust through. And the mind will say, you know what? This gardening thing, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. I've been looking at this soil for a long time. There's nothing coming through. And the way the law works, the way consciousness works, is, and so it is. So you allow doubt, cynicism, worry to creep in there, it's like a weed. This coach was like, oh no, I'm going to celebrate through the tension of change. I'm going to celebrate, and I'm going to affirm over and over and over again what's possible. What the Loyola Ramblers are doing is something that would defy all odds. I mean, nobody in Las Vegas was betting on the Loyola Ramblers, okay? And what the coach said yesterday, before they went out on the court, is there is no finish line. There is no finish line. So tonight's not the night. The championships are not the night. And you could map that on to what we are experiencing on the planet today. There is no finish line. It's not like, man, maybe she'll stop talking about justice issues when ... There is no finish line. So just settle in. All right? Here's what's so funny. You know, I was told this week that there's some folks that are no longer interested in this conversation because I am too political. Now, today begins Holy Week in the Christian tradition. We are approaching Passover. Let me just break down those two holidays for you, because if you'd prefer that we not actually have a conversation about what's occurring on the planet, then you might question the integrity of the spiritual leader. Do you understand what I'm saying? The nature of Passover is to celebrate liberation of the Israelites from the Egyptians. That is inherently political. I realize we'd prefer not to talk about that part and just have dinner. But if we're going to celebrate a holiday, let's actually get the implications of the holiday. Or perhaps you'd like to talk about Jesus. Now, Jesus on today started rolling up into a moment in time where he was about to go through a whole bunch of nonsense for speaking truth to power of the Roman Empire. But we'd prefer not to talk politics, right? That makes no sense whatsoever. You can't have it both ways. You can't unless we just want to turn Easter into Easter bunnies, which is essentially what we've done. But if we're going to be a thinking people, my preference is for thinking people. It's my bias for sure. So if we're going to be a thinking people, then we need to understand the consciousness from which we come. So let me break it down like this. Ernest Holmes says in The Science of Mind, the soul, being the seat of memory, already contains a record of everything that has ever happened to us. These memories as a whole constitute the subjective tendency of the individual life. This tendency can be changed through constant effort and a determined persistency of purpose. The collective unconscious contains a record of all human events that have ever transpired. The sum total of all erroneous human belief binds until the individual mentally lifts himself above the law of averages into the higher law of spiritual individualism. Now let me break down what individualism means here. This is the definition I'd like us to use. Individualism is a social theory favoring freedom of action for individuals over collective or state control. So what I'm not inviting us into is rugged individualism. I'm inviting us into a practice of spiritual individualism. Because if you don't stay awake on the planet, you're going to see the cover of Time magazine and be so inspired. You fell asleep. You don't understand what lives in the soul. The soul is the seat of memory. Do you understand? Let me ask me, do I understand that everything that I am experiencing in this now moment is the collection of all history? It lives in my DNA. It lives in my soul. So when we find ourselves being like, man, why do we have to keep talking about this? Because it lives in you. It lives in your soul. Why, in the Jewish tradition, do we have to keep talking about the liberation from the damn Egyptians? Because if you don't know your history, you repeat it. So we must understand what a liberation consciousness looks like. That is the value of understanding our history. That is the value of staying awake in these times. You know, we are so easily seduced by the mass media. that if you don't pay attention, you'll just get sucked in. That's not spiritual individualism. Spiritual individualism, as I'm defining it here, a social theory favoring freedom of action for individuals over collective or state control. There is individual consciousness and there is collective consciousness. Do you know what narrative you are a part of? Are you the author of your narrative, or are you the reader of your narrative? That's a big distinction. Am I writing the narrative about who and what I am, or am I reading someone else's narrative about who and what I am? That is life-changing. There are a whole series of collective agreements that are at play here all the time. And if you're not aware of what the collective agreements are in the United States of America, if you're not aware of what the collective agreements are in the city of Chicago, if you're not aware what the collective agreements are in the village of Oak Park, they're playing you. So you would want to know, am I putting on a narrative, or is the narrative playing me? So, up until yesterday, I had no voice. My household may have been so happy about that. But I was really praying that I would be able to speak today. And as some of you know, MSNBC is like a dirty little secret for me. I can go down the rabbit hole of it. And when I was laying on the couch, I was watching MSNBC and Dr. Phil. And on MSNBC, there was a young student named Quintez Brown. And he said, tension causes change. So we're going to cause tension to cause change. That's consciousness creating. What was so brilliant about him saying that is he said, I understand how this works. I got it. Okay, so we're still living in a paradigm of pain as humanity. We actually only move, by and large, if we are in an experience of the pain body, so much so that we choose something newly. Michael Beckwith says pain pushes until vision pulls. So the question is, are we moved by pain or are we pulled by vision? What these young students decided is, we see how we get the attention. Let us cause, which is really the work of all nonviolent resistance movements. Let us create so much tension that there has to be a conversation celebrating the tension of change. I am so very grateful for the tension that exists on the planet right now. I am so bullish on this country. I am encouraged by the tension that exists here. What it's indicative of is the birth of a new paradigm. What it's indicative of is a great awakening. The question then becomes, who will we be as a part of that? Quintez says tension causes change. Do you hear how wise that is? Tension causes change. Okay, so then we're going to go ahead and cause tension to cause change. So my intention is for us to scrutinize our mental food. That's always my practice. Do I know what I'm ingesting and what I'm saying yes to? Do I know what I'm ingesting and is leading and guiding the narrative of my life? Scrutinize our mental food. Acknowledge spiritual bypass. What is spiritual bypass? It is the propensity or the tendency to use spiritual principles and practices to whitewash things. It is the impulse to say, all is right and well. Meanwhile, you're bleeding out the side of your face. Something like that. I mean, can you imagine if someone walked in and said, all is right and good. I'm whole, healthy, and complete. And they're like, no, you're gushing blood out of the side of your face. That would be spiritual bypass. Take responsibility for the facts, assume innocence, and celebrate the tension of change. Assume innocence. Who would I be if I assumed the innocence of another in every interaction? You know, the power of this young woman saying, I don't have a beach house to lose. But see, you and I walk into our meetings, we walk into our relationships already on the defense, all ready to pounce. We have forgotten the innocence of those that we're interacting with. And as such, we get ready to defend. That is an exhausting way to live, and it is the greatest misuse of your psychic energy. There was a young man named Alex King from North Lawndale College Prep who spoke at the march yesterday in D.C., and he used a Christian Bible scripture that I want to bring out. Above all, maintain constant love for one another, for love covers a multitude of sins. I want to break down the word sins as we understand it here. We don't believe that you are a sinner. We believe that you are whole, that there is nothing you could ever do, will ever do, have ever done that will compromise your whole and holy nature. Nothing. And the context of sin for us means missing the mark. So there's a spiritual ideal, and then there's a gap between the spiritual ideal and what happens. So a number of years ago, I took a class. I shared this in Calling in the One the other night. And the class was to start at 10 o'clock on day 2. And the agreement was we start at 10 o'clock. And I'm real particular about time. I don't horse around when it comes to time. So if you and I have a meeting, please don't be late, because I love to start on time. And it was 10:15. And my breathing got altered. My pulse was escalating. I was getting highly uncomfortable. Why isn't this class starting? And it was sort of a shared experience. And all of a sudden, someone went up to the leader of the course, and they said, we are starting the class at 10, right? What the heck? And she said, yeah, but no, not everybody's here. And we said, well, yeah, but I'm here. Well, no, but not everybody's here. And if you remember, when we started the class, we made an agreement. And the agreement was that the only way everybody could win, the only way you could win, is if everybody wins. So I'm surprised that you would think we would start on time if you don't know where everybody is. Now, there's 150 people in the class. I'm like, it's not my job to know where everybody is. I'm ready to start because guess what? I did my part. I'm here. And she's like, well, we're not starting, though, because we don't know where everybody is. And I got, like, progressively agitated. But do you understand the consciousness that says, I'm out for me? I'm here. Why aren't we starting? That's what this scripture is speaking to. Above all, maintain constant love for one another. It doesn't say, take care of you and hope everybody else gets theirs. Above all else, maintain constant love for one another. The moment we understand the ability to hold the world of form and a spiritual ideal is the moment we will begin to see real transformation on the planet. One of the questions that came up yesterday, or from last week's talk, was this idea of like, well, if everything is good, then why do we have to worry about all this stuff? Because we live in a realm of paradox. It's true that eternally and spiritually speaking, everything is good. But we are in this human incarnation, in this dimension of reality, to call forward the realization of the spiritual truth, not as a conceptual idea. So it's not enough for us to say, well, I love all folks. I love all folks. Well, that's an idea. How is your life designed to outpicture that ideal? There's a great thinker by the name of Raymond Charles Barker. He wrote a book called The Power of Decision. And he says, thinkers change the world. And you are a thinker. So I want to talk about the thoughts that we're holding in mind that are producing a particular reality. And I ask you if you'd just be willing to take a breath and see, how am I participating in this? That was the invitation that Jay extended to you. She said, I work at the level of the mind, and I'm inviting us in to explore and to scrutinize our world of beliefs so that we can produce a world and a future that's in alignment with what we say matters. So there is a belief in the collective consciousness of humanity, and it's called the belief in lack. The way the belief in lack starts to outpicture is something like poverty exists. So we believe that there's not enough, thus, let me get mine, and other folks are going to have to fight for themselves. As a result, violence ensues. See, humans are not innately violent. But when you put people in environments and strip away resources, violence occurs. Then what happens is you create a consciousness of criminalization. So there's belief in lack that led to poverty. Poverty is leading to an aspect of an experience that involves violence. Violence then produces a consciousness of criminalization. Out of criminalization develops a collective narrative about people. Out of a collective narrative comes a collective agreement. So you and I are consciously creating all the time. We are also unconsciously creating all the time. The invitation of this series this month is to understand who and how you are at the level of the individual, your individual wants and needs, and the group wants and needs. Sister Jean prayed for the Loyola Ramblers since 1994. And I would bet, because women religious are extremely devoted practitioners, that she did not let any circumstance or condition seduce her into the high idea of who the Loyola Ramblers could be. She just kept holding the high watch. Wouldn't it be lovely if we all had a Sister Jean? That's what this community is. It's your Sister Jean. It's what our practitioners do with you after service every Sunday. They hold the high idea when you can't hold it for yourself. So my invitation for us as a community is to hold a high idea for the great awakening that is occurring in the consciousness of humanity right now. It's occurring. It's uncomfortable. Celebrating in the tension of change. I'll close with a few practices that you might consider. Develop the capacity to understand spiritually what is happening at the level of the collective consciousness. Develop the capacity to understand spiritually what is happening at the level of the collective consciousness. Discern what is needed and who you are to be in the awakening of consciousness. Feel the tension of change and celebrate the growth you see. Breathe through the tension of change. and keep affirming a win for all is possible. That's what we're here to be, Bodhi. To keep breathing through the tension of change and to be the midwives of a new paradigm of possibility, a new awakened society, a new world. And that happens when each of us start taking 100% responsibility for the landscape that is our mind. Because from your mind, you create. And you can either create a dog-eat-dog world, or you can create a win for all. And this community is to create a win for all. Many blessings.